Hi, I'm Rebecca, and this, oh my gosh, it's in my face. Okay, if we don't start now, we're never starting. Hi, I'm Rebecca, and this is Rapacious Reads. You will excuse me if I lisp today because I had some dental pain recently. However, I saw a dentist, and it's a mere sports injury, so we shall proceed forward as if nothing had happened. Now, I recently completed my 4th reading of Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen, as per Steve Donahue's required, mandatory read-along in March. This is a compendium of all of Jane Austen's works, and it's very boring and also tattered. I'm sure nobody has this edition that I have here because it's probably much too old. Okay, so I'm just going to talk about my experience with Jane Austen in the past, or more particularly with Pride and Prejudice. So my first experience was, I was 11 or so, and my mom was reading it out of this very book. And she was saying how smart it was and how much she enjoyed reading it. And I, of course, stole the book from her and read it. That was my habit all throughout childhood, was stealing my mom's books and reading them and finishing them before she did. So I read it as a child. And then I probably read it again in my teen years. And then in university, I reread it a 3rd time. So this time now, in my mid to late 20s, is my 4th reading. I've also watched the BBC miniseries, the Keira Knightley film, and the Lizzie Bennet Diaries put on by Hank Green, right? So I am saturated in this story. I know it inside out, backwards, forwards. In fact, it's one of those books that I started to compare real life events to. So when a very good friend of mine got married, I compared it to Charlotte Lucas's marriage, and Elizabeth's feelings on her friend marrying somebody that she didn't exactly like. I got so much more out of the book having lived that experience. Okay, so when I read the first quarter of this, this time around, so the experience of rereading, I felt like I knew it. I have this memorized. I'm not getting anything out of this. I've seen it adapted so many times and compared it to the original that I know it perfectly. And what I did get from the first quarter, however, was I've been recently reading a lot of Trollope and Dickens, and I was just comparing Jane Austen's writing style to some contemporaries. I know they're Victorian, she's Regency, but close enough. And I got an appreciation for her dialogue, because when you read it and it's perfect, you don't realize how much better it is than other things. And after having experienced the strong narrative voices of both Trollope and Dickens, and the way they voice opinions through the narrative voice, Jane Austen's sort of seeming lack of a narrator and focus on the pure dialogue was, or presenting the facts, but seemingly unbiased. I know people will argue against that, but to me, Jane Austen feels like there is no narrator, and compared to her contemporaries, it's truly novel, and it's unique. So that's what I got out of the first quarter. So I got more out of Elizabeth. And she came across unfavorably this read-through. So what I was doing this time was comparing all of the Bennet girls to their parents and looking for similarities and sort of where did they get this trait? Who are they more like, mom or dad? And Normally, because Elizabeth is so, not Elizabeth, yes, Elizabeth, sorry, Elizabeth Jane Elizabeth, because Elizabeth is so favored by her father, one would think that she's very similar to him. But I find that her preconceived notions and her snap judgments and her vivacity are actually more like her mother. I found myself at times asking the question, where's the line between vivacity and silliness? Because the way Elizabeth acts, like, she judges her mother so harshly. And I think that's because Elizabeth is ashamed of seeing those same behaviors in herself. With a little less sense, Elizabeth would be exactly like her mother and would be just as silly. And Elizabeth gets embarrassed about her mother going off in conversation and talking about money and talking about all these things that shouldn't be said in company. But Elizabeth does the same thing with Lady Catherine de Bourgh, and when she's pushing her on not marrying Mr. Darcy. Elizabeth is very rude to her in the way that her mother is rude to Mr. Darcy when he is visiting. So I don't understand how Elizabeth can think to judge her mother for the same things that she does. And yeah, so Elizabeth just came off a lot more negatively this time. Steve Donahue talked about Mrs. Gardner in his second video, the second quarter of the novel. And so that was something I was looking more out for as I finished up the novel. And she is very interesting. And I think what I hadn't noticed in my previous readings is how she pushes Darcy and Elizabeth together. When they're at Pemberley, she pretends she gets really tired and she says, "Oh, I need to take my husband's arm because you're too weak, Elizabeth." So she forces Elizabeth and Darcy to walk, and then she walks really, really slowly, so they have to spend more time in conversation. It's just really cute, and then you can see her like looking curiously at them and like trying to put her finger on what their relationship is. She's like, "Can't believe everything Elizabeth says." And then her letter, when she tells Elizabeth of Mr. Darcy's hand in Lydia's marriage, she has all these hints saying, "Oh, he wouldn't have done it for just anyone. Oh, what is there between you?" And I think that was something I had ignored in previous readings because I was so excited to find that Mr. Darcy had been involved that I missed Mrs. Gardner's interest in the relationship. Let me look at my notes here. Oh, and then when Mr. Collins finds out about Lydia, he immediately tells Lady Catherine de Bourgh, and I was so horrified. I'm like, why are you spreading this blasphemous stain on the family around? Like, why can't you just keep it to yourself, Mr. Collins? Like, why would you do that? I was just angry at him. I was so angry. And then, I guess the final thing that struck me was in the last couple of chapters of the book. I don't have it marked off. It's in chapter 59. When Mr. Darcy asks permission for Elizabeth's hand of her father, he says, "My child, let me not have the grief of seeing you unable to respect your partner in life." And that was just so unutterably sad to me. This fact that he had this empty partnership and he regrets it. And yeah, so those are my thoughts on Pride and Prejudice.